Don't say anything. Not yet. Okay, it's time for Your Turn with Sherre Bishop, where everybody goes to stay up and in touch with the pulse of the community.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Your Turn. It's your favorite auntie, Sherre Miller Bishop. And I tell you what, a lot has been going on. On Sunday, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced that they would call the House back from its annual summer recess for a vote this week on legislation to block changes at the Postal Service that voting advocates warn could, in fact, slow down the mail for those who are casting ballots during this pandemic. It's drawing a lot of conversation about it. There's a lot of confusion about it. There's a lot of frustration about it. The thing I can say to you now is that you have until October to request your mail-in ballot if you're over 60 and you're planning to vote by absentee. But why wait until October when you already know that the mail is going to be possibly slower? First, you have to mail in a request for a ballot. And at that point, that's when they vet you to make sure that you meet all the requirements to be able to vote by absentee ballot. Then they mail you back a ballot. So there's some time in between you mailing something to them to request it. You can also fax it in. Then you have to get that ballot back in the mail. Then you have to fill out that ballot and mail it back. So if you already know that you have until October, but you already know that the mail is going to be slow, don't wait to be a part of that glut, that bottleneck closer to October. Do this thing now, people. This is important. We have to vote. And if you don't plan on going out during this pandemic, standing in a line, they are using social distancing measures there. But if you're a person who has pre-existing conditions and you just don't want to take that opportunity, you don't want to take that chance, I should say, then make sure that you do this early. I've already requested my absentee ballot. If you requested it, by the way, in the August election, you have to request again for November. I've already done mine for November. I'm waiting to get my ballot back in the mail. And then you'll have the first date of early voting. Then you have to, get that in. So, hey, don't procrastinate. Don't sleep on this. Stay woke. Don't sleep on this. This is just a pivotal moment. There's so much at stake here. If you don't want to do this thing for you people, do it for the future. Do it for your grandchildren. The future is calling. And it starts with us taking advantage of this vote. Okay, that was the breaking news for this week, that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has announced that they're going to call the House back into session. They're going to cut short that summer recess so they can take a vote on legislation to block changes at the Postal Service that people feel that could stop people from being able to cast their ballots by mail during the pandemic, or at least slow it down and cause confusion. That's good news that they're going to do that. Now, the other breaking news, have you heard the name Jade Simmons? If you haven't heard it, you definitely want to stay tuned for this conversation. Jade Simmons is an African-American woman, and she's running for president of the United States. How does it make you feel? What do you think about that? I'd be interested to know. Make sure you email me at yourturnwithsherre@gmail.com. Okay, let's get at it. I have a special guest for you today. We've been talking a lot about the coronavirus and the pandemic and the economy, and we're sort of kind of doing all of the above, and I won't hold you in suspicion. You've been hearing a lot about the presidential election. In fact, I would venture as far as to say that everything is kind of teetering on an axis now, because the presidential election is going to really set the tone for all of our lives from this point on in a lot of ways, health-wise, economically, and the list goes on. And you'll see what I mean as we continue the discussion. My guest today is, you're going to be surprised. I was my mouth was hanging open. I happened to be scrolling through Facebook. I came across this picture of this nice looking African-American woman. And there was a little inscription above her name that said, "Would you vote for her?" And my first thought was, vote for her for what? And then I looked down a little further and it said, president. I was like, whoa, she's running for president? I got to find this lady. I got to find this sister and interview her. Her name is Jade Simmons. She is the unexpected candidate during these unexpected times. And that's really the gist of what she's running on, that she's needed in these unexpected times. We'll find out more. But she's an independent candidate for president of the United States of America. She brings a refreshing, nonpartisan approach that is appealing to voters across the political spectrum. And I'm sharing with you her bio. It says it includes people who were planning to sit out the upcoming election. Her restorative platforms serve to rectify historic wrongs done to underserved people, groups, provide access to opportunity for all, and repair fraught relationships between Black and white, the rich, the poor, minority communities, and law enforcement, the left and the right. Jade Simmons, welcome to Your Turn.
Thank you so much for having me, Sherre. I really appreciate it.
Well, we certainly have a lot to talk about because I think this is an unprecedented time. These are unprecedented times. These are uncertain times. And this is probably, I would venture to say that there's more, I don't want to say more excitement for this election than there have been even for when Obama was running or even other campaigns. But there's another word. It's a different type of excitement. It's like people are scared.
Yeah. Anxiety. More anxiety.
Anxiety. I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd like to start off to kind of give people a picture of who you are. I mean, I shared your biographical information, and it kind of substantiates a little bit about your platform, which we'll find out a little bit more about later. But I want to find out a little bit more about you. Now, I did a little bit of research. I'm not one of those types of reporters or interviewers that doesn't do their homework. Tell me a little bit more about your background. You were a classical pianist.
I am a classical concert artist by trade. I went to school for music, majored in music for an undergraduate degree from Northwestern. I came here to Houston to go to Rice University to get my master's in music performance as well. And I made my early career solely as a concert artist. And then I started to switch things up again, which will be a theme you'll see recur throughout my life. But I started to introduce speaking into the performance experience. And that actually parlayed its own career. And I'm now one of the most sought after professional speakers. And a piano comes with me. So I use music to drive my points home. I'm brought in by some of the biggest corporations, companies, organizations to speak on leadership, to help them navigate important periods of change, and I specialize really in transformation, reinvention. If there were two words that I think our nation's needed right now, definitely transformation and reinvention. But yeah, my early days started solely as a concert artist, and today music is still very much a part of what I do.
You're also an author, Audacious Prayer for World Changers. What's that about?
Yeah, I'm a minister as well, and one of the things that I teach people, whether I'm teaching from a pulpit or as a coach to individuals and groups, is that, when you see a void and you find yourself asking over and over, who's going to do something about it? Why won't somebody say something about it? I always say there's always opportunity there to look in the mirror and ask yourself if it might not need to be you that leans into that moment. Why not you? And so that book on prayer, it's one of those things that, how you have these superpowers that you don't think so much about because it's how you operate every day. Well, that was just the way that I prayed. I didn't know that I prayed audaciously until other people heard me pray. And when I put these kind of devotional together, we've been so blessed. It's a best-selling book, and people always say it changed the way they prayed, and it changed their understanding of who God is and who God could be in their lives and how big and impactful they could be. So, it seemed like a detour, but as I look now, it really fits into the theme of activating people into becoming their biggest, boldest self. And so prayer is one of the ways that I believe we get to do that.
God does have GPS and does know how to show us how he wants us to navigate this terrain here.
That's right.
Your book, Audacious Prayer for World Changers, and you're a minister, obviously a Christian, a believer. Did you speak with God about your plan to run for president of the United States?
Well, I speak with God about anything. Listen, so you better believe this what you're seeing. People don't really know how to respond, right? Most of us don't know someone running for president. It's just we see these things from afar. So when it happens close, we've been having fun with people's reactions. People don't know whether to say, is it something you say congratulations to? And I find a lot of people will say, oh, way to go for chasing your dream. And if there was ever a more inaccurate comment, I can't think of one. This is not a dream that you face. This has to be a mission that you are put on course for. I had very different plans for 2020. I did feel a very strong calling on my heart to run for office, but I thought it would be much later on. And my family knew this, and this was something my husband and I had been talking about for years. But you know how it is. You plan your timeline, and God has a funny way of letting you know that it's nothing like his. And so at the beginning of the year, we understood that now was the time. And Sherre, people always say, how did you decide that now was the time? Well, we had a sense, I had a sense very strongly that our nation was coming into an unprecedented era of division, but especially where race relations were concerned. I just sensed we were going to be at an all-time low. I also felt like we were coming into a season where our gross disparities between the haves and the have-nots were not only going to be exposed, they're going to be exacerbated. But I did not see COVID-19 coming like it did, and I did not see the death of George Floyd causing what it caused. And so even though I decided to run in January, these things that happened in March and then in May validated this feeling I was having, that we were coming into a season like I described. And I feel like the number one thing the next leader is going to have is first of all, compassion for all people, an ability to not choose sides, but also an ability to be a champion for the underserved, to speak unapologetically about things that need to be restored and overturned and redone. And so I feel more than qualified to step into that moment. I feel like you have to have a top communicator to take us through this new era, and that's one of the things that I bring proudly to the table. I feel very confident in that aspect.
In case you just tuned in, you're listening to Your Turn. It's Sherre Miller Bishop, your host, and my guest is Jade Simmons. She is an African-American woman. She's an author. She's a classical pianist. She's a speaker. I mean, she's a minister. She's a believer. And it's so much to this woman, and we're finding a lot more about her. And I sure do miss you guys being live in the studio, being able to have you call in and ask questions. But we still are remaining committed to try and keep you informed of options out there. And we always say that we are building a more informed, collaborative, active, and passionate community. And the way we stay informed is we find different information to bring to you, and of course, resources. And this is someone that you ought to know about, Jade Simmons. She's running for president of the United States of America. And you said that people don't know how to respond a lot of times. And I'm just curious, do you think that the reactions that Kanye West got to his campaign run under the birthday party, as he calls it, do you think that helped or hurt your efforts or impacted it?
Oh, yeah. Kanye West is definitely a thorn in my side. We have faced an extreme shutout from the mainstream media. That's why we're so thankful for people like you, Sherre, who see fit. You said you saw it and you thought, we got to know more. And we assumed naively that was how all of the media would respond. Here was this Black woman running as an independent, unfettered by either political party, coming in, boldly saying this is a time for new leadership. We thought that was a story. And we even waited a month before we announced to the public because we wanted all of our paperwork filed. We wanted to make sure we were on track to be in as many states possible. And yet for 7, almost 8 months now, I've been running, and most people don't know that I'm here. Kanye West announced on July 4th, and within 38 minutes, he was covered by every major news outlet without having filed with the FEC, with having no plans or policies or proposals, no website, nothing of the sort. Yet he was covered widely. And the question, we're getting treated with so much suspicion, Sherre. People assume that I'm being paid by Trump, that the Russians are funding me. On the right, they're assuming that this is a ploy of the Democrats to split the evangelical vote. I mean, the accusations are wild, yet the suspicion that is being thrown at us should be thrown at the establishment. We're watching the right and the left and the media work overtime to make sure America doesn't know I'm here, because they understand that what we're presenting is not only a viable option, but it is one that people are beginning to navigate towards. We're having people from every end of the political spectrum buy in with us. They see a real opportunity and option for historic change, not because I'm a Black woman, but because of the things that I'm proposing would create paradigm shifts in our economy, in our society, and it would enable more people to prosper. And both political sides can't afford to have us find out we actually have more things in common than we thought. So Kanye West, who I have encountered during this journey, look, we need to have serious contenders. If we're a democracy, it only flourishes with an abundance of choices. So I don't begrudge anyone's desire to run, but I do demand that we all run seriously and that we all get the same amount of coverage. And I don't believe he's done the independent ticket any justice. And so I have thought that. People assume that I just started running yesterday. They don't know I've been running since January. So the association has not been helpful. But all we've been doing is standing firm, presenting real policy, real solutions, and hoping that people will do, as you say, Sherre, inform themselves. Don't just vote in fear, but take the time to get to know all of your options.
Absolutely. You say you launched your campaign in January, and I would say there was minus a lot of fanfare because a lot of people had not heard of you. Why January? Were you late? Why so late in the process?
Well, like I said, I've thought about running much farther into the future. So, January.
So it wasn't a spur of the moment thought. You'd already been talking about it and planning.
No, I'd already been talking about it with my family. It was going to be much farther down the road into the future, many years from now. And what we sensed coming into the new year was that the time was now to offer the solution that I felt called to bring forth. That this wasn't, that we're not promised tomorrow. COVID-19 taught us anything. We are not promised tomorrow. And so even though we decided in January to run, we announced at the end of February. The same week that I announced was the week that all the Democratic candidates dropped out. Remember, Biden won South Carolina, and then the other candidates kind of followed suit and dropped out to line up behind him. So the plan was, the hope was, the preparation was to be, debating against all of these different candidates. But by the time that I announced that same week, the others had dropped out. And I think that's another thing we look at very naively. They didn't just drop out in the same week. They were asked to back down. And I think already, again, that is not what democracy is supposed to be. If you're a member of the Democratic Party, you should be upset that you didn't get to look at your options for much longer than you did. Why was the race over in February? We happen to believe that January shouldn't be late. Every other developed nation, their presidential elections happen in 4 to 6 months. They have 5 and 6 candidates on the ballot. We have hyperinflated this idea of running for 2 years and having it cost $1 billion. That's not what it should be. That is too much time, energy, and attention and money spent on the attainment of power. So we believe what we're doing is bringing things back into balance. This is about how long it should take. Americans know how to make tough decisions in a short amount of time. So we believe this is the perfect time for people to really weigh their options seriously.
We have a lot of interesting things about our election. You know, it's a two-party, pretty much, election with Republicans versus Democratic candidates. But I look back at some stats that show that there's quite a bit of interest. The last Gallup poll showed that Republicans and Democrat interest in elections was 28% for Republicans, 29% for Democrats, and get this, 38% for independents. And it was pretty much the same thing for June and just throughout pretty much. And that's it. That raised an eyebrow to me because there's a lot of interest from those supporting independent candidates. And one other interesting thing. Okay, they're asking group in terms of what is the interest in the candidates that are running, Biden and Trump, of course. And the interest said that there were 36% who were voting, and I may have to repeat this twice because this went over my head the first time. It said 36% were voting for Biden, 58% said they were voting against Trump. Now, somebody missed that. They said 36%, yeah, we're voting for Biden, but 58% said they were voting against Trump. And the difference there, in case somebody missed that, is that they didn't say that they necessarily were in love with Biden. They said that 58% said they were voting against Trump. They just wanted Trump out.
Yes, no, I would say that's a conservative statistic.
We have
yet to find anyone that has come out to people who are upset that I am running, that are worried that I'm going to miss the vote. We have yet to have anyone say, we love Biden, not one. Everybody who comes at us says, we just need to get Trump out of there. Now, on the other side, if you ask Republicans, there are many of them, by the way, who plan on not voting for Trump. They were thinking about Biden. And now they are saying they like my candidacy because it doesn't pull them farther than where they want to be, but it gives them an alternative that they can sleep at night with. So what we are also seeing is the ones who love Trump. They come and they say, Trump 2020. They don't care about policy, plans of action, record of certain. They don't care. They just love them from Trump, and you're never going to do anything about those. But we are here because we believe Americans should not have to vote between what feels like the lesser of two evils to them. And people will always throw this split vote mythology up, but the statistics show that's not what's happening. The people who voted for Joe Stein last time around were not going to vote for Hillary Clinton. And we are running into people who say they are not voting for Biden, they are not voting for Trump. In fact, they were considering sitting out altogether. So when people often vote independent, we believe those numbers are big because most Americans are independent. Even when you find a Democrat or Republican, when you talk to them on an individual level, they say, well, I really am more independent, right? And we know that independents tend to lean one way or the other. But we do believe the majority of Americans don't look like the hyper-polarized groups they keep showing us in the media. We're meeting people who are sick and tired of the division and who want to see a leader who once and for all will declare to prioritize people over politics, over party, over profit, over personal agenda. And that's what we're catching steam with Americans who don't feel like the two-party system is even serving them. And they feel like they're picking one side of the same coin, and they're done with that.
And that is typically how the independent candidates get someone to vote other, because it's typically someone who is not happy with the status quo, with the two-party system. And have you heard from the Trump campaign at all? I would think that he would be happy that there's a third person running under a different party, of course.
We have not heard anything from him. We have heard from supporters of his who are really worried that we are going to take away their Christian vote. They depend so heavily on the evangelical vote. And so because I run openly as a Christian, I'm not apologetic about it, but I do present it in a much different way than it's been hijacked on the right. One of the reasons I run with my faith out front is because I feel like people should see a different representation of what it means to lead as a faith-based servant leader. And so what my faith dictates is that in spite of our differences, in spite of how we might believe differently, I am still called to honor you, love you, serve you, and protect you. And that's a very different timbre and tone than what's been coming out of the Trump administration. I feel like we've seen religion manipulated. We've seen scripture distorted. And so you see Christians who say they can no longer hitch their wagon to the president, who are looking at my campaign for a place where they feel like it's home. And so we do see people from the right who are considering our campaign, and they feel much more comfortable voting for us than they do voting for Biden. We're also seeing, this is the wild thing, Sherry, progressives from the far left are finding a home in us because we're so unapologetic about really serving regular, everyday people and also putting forth plans that help people build a pathway out of poverty. And out of the same mouth, we're talking about welfare reform that makes sure we don't have government-controlled poverty. And out of the same mouth, we're saying, listen, we have to have American companies come here and repatriate. We bailed them out enough. Yet when it's time for them to bail us out with new jobs and new manufacturing opportunities, they are gone. You don't see them. And part of that is because the president ran on bringing jobs back to America, and then behind his base's back, he signed into being a tax law that incentivizes American corporations to continue to profit abroad instead of being at home. So Americans are done with that double talk. They are done with the pandering and what I call performance art of Congress, where they pretend like they're going to do something, and they create these bills that they know are not going to go through because they're designed to be hyper-partisan. So Americans are starting to see through that. And they're also appreciating the transparency and the willingness that I like to see issues through from end to end.
But let me ask you this before we go to break, because I don't even want them to wait on this. You say you're a minister and you are a Christian. And I'm going to try real hard not to get on my soapbox. And listeners have said I say this in a pretty raw way. I feel like God is being prostituted because you have so many people that will spew poison and they will throw God in the middle of it and use that to make the poison Kool-Aid sweet. When if you're spewing poison, and even if you put God in it, God is still God, but the poison is still poison. So
yeah, but we know what the scripture says. So you can't have that bitter seed come out of the same spigot. So we're in a season of hypocrisy being revealed, and I also think we're in a choose you this day season where Christians who said that they've only voted on the right because they were trying to pass certain laws. We have to make sure we're not sacrificing our actual morality in service to gaining power or to get to a moral agenda. I really feel like God's not looking at how we're voting. He's looking at how our hearts are aligned and how we're validating and justifying our stances. And so this is a choose you this day season, and we're trying to serve as an alternative for people who honestly have felt dirty after they come out of a polling booth.
I tell you what, we got to pause now to take just a quick break. I'm speaking with Jade Simmons. She is an African-American woman who's running for president of the United States of America. You stick around. We'll be right back. Well, the pandemic is going to force a lot of us to have a staycation by staying at home. Why not have a beautiful sun deck built instead of just watching the vultures pick at your grass? Have a sun deck built. Memorial Day, Labor Day, Independence Day, birthdays, graduation, all this stuff is coming up. Beautify your backyard. Have that sun deck built or have your old sun deck restored. Jeff R. is your guy. Call Jeff R. at 615-589-3667. Get on deck with Jeff for a free quote at 615-589-3667.
And now, back to your turn with Sherre Bishop.
And we are back. You're listening to Your Turn. It's your favorite auntie, Sherre Miller Bishop. My guest is Jade Simmons. She is an African-American woman who's running for president of the United States. And I actually hate having to keep saying she's an African-American woman, but I have to because it's significant to this campaign, number one. And number two, because it's radio, audio, and you can't see her. I have to kind of be a little bit more descriptive. Okay. All right. If you missed the first half, I just want to let you know that you can go to my Facebook page and it'll maintain a little bit of a shelf life where you can go back and listen to it. You can call a friend and say, hey, you missed that. Go to Sherre Bishop's Facebook page and you can watch it, listen to it there. And we'll post the link where you can catch it. And if you're listening now and you want someone to tune in now, just have them to go to 760thegospel.com. That's 760, the is spelled out, gospel.com, 760thegospel.com, and click listen now and she can hear the rest of the show. All right. So Jade, when we talked earlier, when we began and you were talking about your background, I meant to ask you this earlier. You did not mention among being a classical pianist, an author, a minister, a professional speaker, presenter, transformational speaker. You did not mention things that I thought I would hear of a political candidate, having served on the city council, the Senate, any part of the legislature. You didn't mention a political background.
That's right.
And that's the same thing that Trump ran on, that he didn't have the political experience. How does that affect you when I say that?
I think, listen, Americans would be naive not to side-eye someone coming in running on no political experience because of what we've seen with Trump. But what I would ask people is, if you look at President Trump and you list the top 5 things that you love about him or that you dislike about him, I promise you, his political experience is not the reason that you dislike him. His political inexperience is not the reason. And if you do like a leader, it's not because of their political experience. It's because of who they are. It's because of their character, how they treated people, how they've made decisions. And although President Trump ran on being a political outsider, it really wasn't true. He has been in politics all of his life. He's funded campaigns to his own benefit, and he's always operated a personal agenda at the forefront. And people say, well, I elected him because he was a businessman. Well, you want to know how somebody's going to lead, you look at how they've always lived. And President Trump used bankruptcy as a mode of operation in his business. Over 7 bankruptcies. And we now see a president that is okay with morally bankrupting the country, spiritually bankrupting the country. If he cared about the Christians that many put him in office, he wouldn't jeopardize their witness by every time that he speaks and then the behavior that he exhibits, if he really cared about the evangelical base that helped put him in office. So we're watching someone who always makes moves with personal agenda at the forefront. That's not who I am. If you look at how I have lived, you will see a leader who always prioritizes people, especially over profits, especially over personal agenda. Like many other small business owners, I went through the horror of COVID-19. The shutdown was especially hard on us because my career is made in front of big audiences, Sherre. So we were instantly shut down. And as we had to decide, what were we going to do about salaries? Here's what we did. First of all, my employees all make very, very good wages. And in terms of minimum wage, we pay $18 an hour above the federal minimum because I prioritize my people, even over the bottom line, because people are your long-term solution. They're your long-term resource.
A precious commodity.
Priceless commodity. It's the best resource we have, and so we must take care of them. And if I can't be building my American dream on the backs of American workers and they're not sharing in the prosperity. And so that's the way that I have lived. I always aim to help people discover their purpose. I believe our nation has a great purpose that we have lost sight of. I believe we've allowed ourselves to be divided. And I'm always the person in the room who's called on to see between the lines, to hear the things that aren't really being said, and to find uncommon common ground in hard situations between groups that shouldn't be able to agree. And so that's the skill set that I bring to the table. It's not about political inexperience. It's about what is the new lane of experience that this moment requires. This moment requires an excellent communicator, not someone who can put together a sentence, but who can really talk us through the transition that we're in without instigating and causing division, without going silent like we've seen on the other side. As well, the head of state has to represent our nation powerfully. We have a serious PR crisis on our hands that also needs to be overturned by the next leader. We talk about international relations. So you're not going to see city council on my resume. You're not going to see Senate. And it's not because I don't think those positions are powerful. But when you talk about where vision is cast, atmosphere is set, and the climate is changed from the top. The current president has proven that. And so in order to reverse that and give the nation a climate that is one conducive to the reset that we're in, we have to see a change in leadership, and I present myself as a powerful option for that change.
You talked about us having a PR crisis. You talked about the need for, and as a communication specialist myself and a speaker coach, I know the value of having a presence. I know the value of being a great communicator. Ronald Reagan was the great communicator. Trump is, I have critiqued him time and time again on the things he says, how he says what he says, even his body movements and his hand movements and his ramblings. And I'm just trying to want to hear from you. How will you bring a presidential style to serving, and much more than communication, in being a president for the people and for the needs of the people?
First of all, I would actually push back a little bit, Sherry. I think the president has been highly effective in his communication because he has decided to communicate to a very small amount of people. But that small amount of people have served him well. So he speaks and acts in accordance to what it is they want to see. And if you sign up for his newsletter or his text messages or any of these things, which I do so that I can understand the competition, they are very effective at sound bites and getting their people to regurgitate what's being said. So it's not what we are used to, what we want to see, but it's been effective. My difference is I believe the president must be chief inspiration officer as well. And I don't think inspiration is just about motivational speaking. It's can you breathe life into people that causes them to do things differently and see things differently. And the knack that I've had as a communicator is that usually when I'm entered into the equation, people see things differently. They gain new perspective. They gain empathy. And so to move through this time where protest and prayer now has to go into reform and action, we're going to have to help people see the vision. And so I believe the president's chief job is to be able to cast vision that everybody can lay hold to. And I think what the current president has done is purposely cast a vision that only a few want to see. And I believe now we have to have the creativity and collaboration of an artist, the discipline and focus of an artist that's going to help more people see the possibilities. So we talk about platform. There's all these very specific things we can get into. But really what it boils down to is can we provide access to opportunity for more Americans than ever before. We're determined now not to be an instigator in chief and also not to be a panderer in chief. And I do believe those are the two options before us. You and I, Sherry, it's the people here. We're the ones getting all beat up. We never see the solutions. Yet red and blue, one of them in some way, shape, or form gets to stay in power. And the people end up being powerless. So I say that I'm...
Do you feel that you have a to carry a kind of a dual allegiance as a presidential candidate, being an African American who's running for president of the United States? Barack Obama, people expected him to be, too many people expected him to be a president for black people when he was a president for the people. And do you feel that sense of pressure in running? You know, you go on a job interview and they'll ask you, are you able to work with diverse groups? Are you able to communicate with all of those groups in those different arenas and not leave out the black person, but not make the people of other races feel that you are not being fair.
My career has already proven my penchant for multiculturalism. I mean, for heaven's sake, I'm a black woman in the world of classical music, so I know what it's like to the only one in this room. I know what it's like to be in the dominant culture. I've always been keenly aware of injustice, and I've never shied away from having those conversations. So what we did to sort of put these things to rest, Sherre, is on my website, which my team would kill me, I haven't mentioned, is Operation Restoration.
Operation Restoration. Operation Restoration 2020.com. Let's get that in there. Okay.
That's right. And that's where you go to see the policy and the solutions that we've been releasing since the beginning of the year. And we have a whole section called Shade with Breakthrough. And we launched with Breakthrough for Black America.
What's that called again?
Shade the Breakthrough.
Shade the Breakthrough.
And we launched with the section called Breakthrough for Black America. And we did that because of the season we're in. The luxury Barack Obama didn't have was because of the horror of the world watching George Floyd's murder. We now have universal buy-in that systemic racism exists. There were still people wanting to debate whether or not it was a real thing. Once we had George Floyd, what happened was it opened up room for a real discussion, and you also had, people don't like to admit this, but when you have change, what actually has to happen is the oppressed has to have buy-in from the people who look like the oppressors. So what you had was you had white people saying, oh my God, this is a thing. Suddenly you had that buy-in, and you have more white people and people from other ethnicities agreeing with black people that this is an issue that needs to be solved. So you saw the shows of solidarity, the symbolism, that's coming down, and the Bible being yanked off the shelf. But I say, wait a minute, we cannot waste this era of symbolism. This cannot just be Nancy Pelosi and Kinde Clark kneeling in the Capitol. It cannot end there. We must actually have to have real reform, educational, economic, and police reform, and criminal justice reform. And I don't think Barack Obama had the moment. He came in as the unifier of all, which I love the idea of unifying. But before we get to the kumbaya, Sherre, we've got to do the hard work of the diagnosis of the heart issues at play. We've got to do the hard work of creating true reform. And then we've got to really press that through to see a paradigm shift before we get to the reconciliation. And so that's the difference that I think, it's the tragedy of George Floyd that happened in the midst of COVID-19. And that provided for a moment that I fear, if we do politics as usual, you put red in office again, people on the other side are going to see that as a slap in the face to the moment that is now, where the progress for racial reform is. And if you put blue in office, you're going to see red just digging their heels and oppose like they did when Obama was elected. So we now need a palate cleansing presidency, and what's better than an absolute independent that does not have to choose sides except the side of the people. That's the difference in this moment, and I get to do that. I have the privilege of doing that, and I don't have to worry as much about being called a reverse racist because we now have universal buy-in that these injustices need to be dealt with.
Let's touch on a few issues that are hot buttons for a lot of people to see what your thoughts on those. If you had to give the white evangelicals a report card, what grade would you give them at this point in terms of their involvement in politics?
I give us all at this point an F because we have no longer prioritized people. And it's exactly, they've been playing politics and people have suffered. So if you look at a hot button evangelical issue like abortion, if we were really serious about seeing the rate of abortion go down, we wouldn't tackle it with demonization. What we would do is also focus on things like equal pay for women, since we know the number one cause of abortion has to do with economic concerns, and it's mostly from unwanted pregnancy. It's not rape or incest. It's not the extremes. It's not even fetal abnormalities. It's simply a woman saying, whoa, this was a pregnancy I wasn't expecting. Oftentimes it's a single woman. Oftentimes it's an impoverished woman. Oftentimes it's a woman who already has children. So if we dealt with issues like equal pay, if we weren't so busy snatching women off of SNAP in the middle of COVID-19, that would also be pro-life. And if you're pro-life, you can't just care about the baby in the womb. You got to care about life all the way to the tomb. That means you should be equally outraged about a knee on the neck of George Floyd as you are about the death of an unborn baby. I believe passionately in the sanctity of life. I already told you, I believe people are our greatest resource. I do believe our nation has blood on its hands where abortion is concerned, but that's not the only blood. We got Native American blood on our hands. We got the blood of slaves on our hands. We've got the blood of the impoverished on our hands. We have the blood of police brutality on our hands. And so we have to care. We look at community crime, which people like to call black-on-black crime, which really, all of that's a different problem because every ethnic kills their own the most. And so instead of pointing fingers and demonizing the other side, let's deal with all of the systemic issues that create the surface issues that we keep allowing ourselves to be polarized by. So we get an F for allowing the attainment of power to trump actual policy that serves people on both sides of the aisle.
Do you think as a minister and as a Christian that politics should have a place in Christianity?
I think it should be the other way around. Your faith should go with you wherever you go. So it's the reason I run openly on my faith, because I don't want you having a dig through, find out on the side I'm a Christian, and then have to wonder if I'm the same Christian as the guy who was holding his Bible upside down a few months ago. I want you to know that my Christianity is different, and that I stand on those biblical principles. I want you to see the fruits of the Spirit. I've had Christians say, we don't need him to be a saint. We just need someone to push our ideas. We want a bully in the White House. But that's not biblical. And Jesus was not always a polite guy, but he had principles, he had core values, and he also was often with the outcast. So we are proud of the fact that even though we're openly a faith-based movement, we have agnostics and atheists finding a home in Operation Restoration. We have the LGBT community saying, listen, we know you don't agree with us on everything, but we see somebody that sees us as humans and loves us in spite of our differences. And I'm open and honest about the things that we're going to define differently. I'm not going to define marriage the same way as I call them family members of the LGBT community. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't disallow me from serving them and honoring them powerfully and making sure that I'm discriminated against where housing is concerned.
So do you see any conflict of interest with that bumping heads with as a faith-based campaign with, the federal government won't support different things when it comes to politics? When it comes to religion.
Well, you're probably talking about, I guess, the separation of church and state.
Yes.
Which, we have no intent of blurring that line, but I think before people drop that as an argument about why I should be quiet about faith, we need to understand that that's actually not a part of our Constitution. That was something that Thomas Jefferson wrote in a letter, the wall of separation between church and state. And he talked about it because he was worried that one sect of Christianity would try to dominate another. So that's where that separation comes from. But rest assured, my job is not to prophesy anything. Now, if people look at me and the way that I move and want to know more about the God I serve, then, man, that's a wonderful icing on the cake for me. But my job as president would be that I lead from a perspective of service. And that's something that is informed for me by my faith. And so, being an openly faith-based person doesn't mean that you're there to force your faith. And it also shouldn't mean that you're using religion to manipulate others into voting or doing like you want them to do.
Jade Simmons is my guest. She is a candidate for president of the United States. And I figured you probably hadn't heard of her, but you're hearing about her today. We're talking about just some issues that are hot buttons for people to see what her thoughts on that, so we can kind of squeeze all of it in here, okay? So Black Lives Matter. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, I'm a Black person, so it was never a mystery. It was a mystery to me whether or not Black Lives Mattered. And my father's work in civil rights back in Charleston, South Carolina.
What was your dad's name?
My dad is Jerome Smalls, and he's still living and still If you want to see protest in action, there's probably not many a day you won't find him on the streets in Charleston fighting mostly against gentrification. He's been the long-time thorn in the side of the previous Mayor Joe Riley, who was
Right. So you grew up seeing civil rights in action.
I did. In action. So listen, my father sees all of this as very bittersweet. He loves that there are a younger generation finally out in the streets again, because he's been in the streets by himself for the majority of the time that I have known him. So
wow.
He loves this new fervor. Like many people his age, he hopes that it will last and turn into real action. And for him, watching his daughter step into this void is bittersweet, because he always felt like the work he did was so that he wouldn't need to have a daughter who's still talking about these issues and fighting for the same things that he's been fighting for. But if he had to design a future for me, it definitely didn't include politics. And the one I was designing for myself didn't include it either. So,
but it did kind of loop right back around. But now back on the Black Lives Matter issue, a lot of people, I heard you say that, of course, as an African American person, that you agree that Black Lives Matter. But a lot of people have issues with the Black Lives Matter movement, in that there are a lot of, when you read that full document, the full platform, there are some issues that people find troublesome. There are a lot of issues built into that platform, and I think I advise everyone to read the full deal. I came away from it agreeing that I do agree that Black Lives Matter. I agree with the sentiment, but I do still have some questions when it comes to some of the platform. What is your position on their platform?
I, out of principle, never align myself with different organizations that I didn't have a hand in, and that I didn't know or have a part in writing the mission statement. So I already knew that while I supported the cause of Black Lives Mattering and all lives matter, I knew that I didn't align with everything in the mission statement for Black Lives Matter. So I'm very careful in alignment. I'm also very careful even in the hashtags that I use and the rhetoric. You won't see phrases like defund police or dismantle police in any of my social media, not because I don't believe there should be funds reallocated to crisis prevention, but because I understand the nature of politics is to hijack rhetoric and misinterpret and misuse it on purpose. I don't align only with the Black Lives Matter organization. I do believe that Black Lives Matter. I believe that all lives can only matter once all lives actually matter.
Some people would point at you and say, Jade Simmons, you're an African American running for president at a particular time of uncertainty, when 30 million people have lost jobs. Much of America is in despair over their bills, health care, how to feed their children, and in the middle. So you have a situation where much of America is in despair. They don't know how they're going to feed their children, pay their bills. Then they're worried about breathing, staying safe from COVID-19. And you have all of this racial unrest with people protesting in the streets. And this is a pivotal moment right now, especially for African Americans, because I can't remember in my lifetime when we had this much attention on African Americans in the spotlight, from Aunt Jemima being taken off of pancake boxes to monuments being taken down. And I think it was all kind of launched from many black men being gunned down by white police officers, and then the George Floyd incident and the Breonna Taylor incident and the Ahmaud Arbery incident and so forth. And I say incident, but murders is the correct word for it. So to play devil's advocate, someone would point at you and say, with all of this going on, it's a pivotal time. We can't afford to not have. Do you feel that you're going to divide those votes? Because historically, a third party or independent candidate has not won. They've only been able to increase interest in the election And I think the last time was 1992. It's hard to defeat a sitting president, and that's not been done since about 1992. So what's your comeback to that?
Well, I only get asked that about 3 times every hour. So I'm getting pretty used to it at this point. Here's what I would say for starters. If this moment is as pivotal as you say, why would we not elect pivotal leadership? Why would we do the same thing over and over? I know the history of the third party candidate. The split vote is a mythology. So we need to stop allowing that to make us line up behind these parties in fearful obedience and keep reelecting the same thing as usual. We're in a time that requires a paradigm shift, and you're either going to keep the instigator-in-chief in office, or you're going to elect someone that I just don't feel is powerful enough to stand up to this moment. So if we're just talking about Black people here, if we actually united behind the revolutionary option for a change, instead of hiding behind fearfully blue lines, waiting for them to do work they have yet to do on our behalves, I think then that is the wasted vote. I think the powerful vote is to line up behind the revolutionary option and actually vote for someone who's unapologetically going after the change that's required, who also has the potential to gain the undecided votes, the new voters coming in. 7 million 17-year-olds turned 18 before the election, and they are not looking to vote for either of the status quo options. Last time when Jill Stein ran, she didn't split the vote. She gained 6 million new voters who were not going to vote for either of the status quo options. We have that opportunity. We have people telling us that they weren't planning on voting and now they're voting for us. Others who weren't registered and now they are registering so they can vote for us. We have people on the right saying they are leaving the Republican Party because it no longer stands for who they are. People on the left saying the same. When you've got conservative Christian pastors and progressive, disgruntled Bernie bros all saying they found a home with atheists, agnostics, LGBTQ, Black, white, Native American, Christian, and otherwise, why would we not do something revolutionary in this moment? So the split vote thing, we can sit on that if we want and pretend, but I think we have to now ask ourselves, is the option that we're hiding behind really the savior it's supposed to be? Or do we now vote for someone that we know has our best interest at heart and has the potential to really push into being the things that we need to finish? This is a birthing process we're in. And I feel like if we were to choose one option, we get anesthesia. We get to feel a little better, but not really do any better. And if we choose the current option in office, then it's going to make things worse. I will end by saying, Sherre, what the stats also show, an incumbent is impossible to beat except when the economy is in trouble. In every instance where you had an incumbent, George Bush, and then you had economic trouble, Jimmy Carter as well, the incumbent lost. We are watching a sitting president with an economy that is crumbling. The ingredients are actually ripe for a major disruption. We happen to believe that we can be the disruption that America needs if only they vote now, not out of fear, but they decide to let the best vision win. And we believe that our vision stands up to everything else that's out there.
What's your website so that people can go to your webpage and read more about you?
Yes, OperationRestoration2020.com. We were actually just in Tennessee doing the hard work of getting on the ballot, and we are excited we'll be on the ballot in Tennessee. And we're also, as an independent candidate, I get to choose my electors. So email us at info@OperationRestoration2020.com. If you liked what you heard and you want to make history with us, we'd love to have you represent us in the Electoral College. I'm on social media, Operation Restoration 2020 on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, official Jade Simmons, and on Twitter at Jade Simmons. And I'd love to interact and engage.
Okay. All right. Jade Simmons, thank you so much. Best of luck to you. And hey, keep in touch with us and let us know how you're doing.
Thank you so much for making room for my voice, Sherre. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, that was Jade Simmons, again, an African-American woman who is running for president of the United States. Wow, where does the time go? We're not out of comments, but we're out of time. Listen, I'm Sherre Miller Bishop. I want you to remember, be true to the one in the mirror. God made you in his image. Now you go represent. I'm Sherre Bishop. This has been Your Turn.
You've been listening to Your Turn with Sherre Bishop, where everybody goes to stay up and in touch with the pulse of the community. Thank you for listening.